Irene Compadre is the founding principal of Arbolope Studio. She has a background in musical composition, architecture, sculpture, and scenic art, which helped inspire her work. She also holds a Master of Landscape Architecture degree with honors and a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture degree from the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University in St. Louis, where she is also on the faculty as an adjunct faculty teaching graduate level courses in landscape architecture, and urban design. The title of her talk today is Pathmaking, a Landscape Architectural Journey.
Thank you. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Oh, great. So thank you, Ball State, for this invitation. I think the act of putting these presentations together is a really wonderful moment to reflect on what it is we're doing. So I started a small practice, Arbolope Studio, a number of years ago, and I was telling some of the students that when you start, you're just seeing, like, is this going to work? And then at some point you have to say, okay, I'm still here, so what am I? So it's presentations like these that help, or they've helped me start to understand the context of the firm and the larger picture, and also help me decide where we want to be in the future. Let's see. So Arbolope Studio, founded 2012. Kind of, I like to say there's kind of three iterations of Arbolope. There's Arbolope 1.0, which is 2012 to about 2015. Arbolope 2.0, which is about 2015 to end of 2018, beginning of 19. So we're entering Arbolope 3.0, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So Arbolope, people ask what is Arbolope? So it's the Arbolope. So the Arbolope is a creature that speaks for the trees. It's inspired by Dr. Seuss's The Lorax, which I've always found kind of this like beautiful story. And at some point I was reflecting back and thinking, it's so depressing at the end. You have the Lorax who's speaking for the trees, and I'm going to get all the characters wrong, but basically you have industry come in and completely destroy the natural environment, and there's no way for those two things to coexist. So at the end, the Lorax kind of floats away, and he's like, "I'm sorry, you've destroyed it all." And of course, he rhymes a lot better than that. And then at the very end, it's I forget the bad guy, but he's like hands a seed to the small child. It's like, okay, maybe you can do something better in the future. So I've always had this internal narrative that maybe there's a great-grandchild of the Lorax, and he's trying to find a way to make something work for our contemporary society. So is there some way, like, we're natural creatures, right? So all of the destruction, everything that we're doing, like, we're not outside of nature. We're somehow part of this system. So what does that mean? Like, can we find some kind of balance? So I'm not sure how much we directly, that's sort of the milieu in which I'm operating. And, I think we're addressing this in different ways. We're a woman-owned business, minority-owned business, services provided. Yeah, so we always say we're landscape architecture, urban design, and public art, and it's always been important to me to bridge those, that boundary. Why we're not architecture, why we're not, what are the distinctions? I think it's a little bit flexible, but for me it was very important to have this public art component to the practice because I'm a landscape architect. But I also have this art background, and I think there's something to that. And it's a heavy topic of conversation of like, where do these design boundaries, like what's the relevancy of having them? But those three were important at the foundation, and I think they continue to be relevant for us. So this is our studio. Myself, I have Anu and Xiaoqing are my right and my left hand. Michael, marketing, he's actually floating around here somewhere, I think taking some photos. Michael's my husband and probably biggest supporter. I include our summer interns because for us it's always, as a small studio, having this kind of constant influx of interns. We think of ourselves as sort of a step between practice and academia, where we really try to coach our interns. Like, Anu and I both teach at the university. Xiaoqing used to teach. Michael also teaches. Like we're, teaching is very important, and so our interns come in, and yes, they are like there to work in an office, but I think we also really try to support them and help them. So anyway, those were our summer interns last summer, and they continue to be presented with. And then of course our receptionist is very young and a little inexperienced, and security. I try to break down the kinds of projects we do, not civic, campus, hospital. That's just not how I've broken them down. I think of the broad categories as something like city campus corridor work. This is maybe kind of planning, larger scale streetscape work. Gather, commemorate, relax covers a really broad spectrum of projects, from residential work all the way through kind of big park planning. Contribute, collaborate, community is a set of our studio where we have maybe a more civic-minded, I'm not going to say pro bono for, I don't really believe in pro bono work, and there's more on that maybe later, but it's our civic branch where we're trying to be part of the community, and it's very, it's like at the cusp of pro bono and actually like running a business. Play, experiment, create is kind of our playscapes, our art, our collaboration with artists, our more playful experimentation branch, and then elevate, activate, enjoy, which is essentially landscape on structure, but it takes a lot of forms, and whether, very, very obvious, very manufactured, all the way to landscapes that you actually don't realize are under any kind of structure or on top of any kind of structure. A little bit about our culture is that we're small, we're extremely collaborative, not so hierarchical somewhat because we are sort of a younger practice. I had a business partner for this is why we're entering Arbolope 3.0 is I had a business partner who was my best friend, former professor at the university who passed away recently, and so we're kind of entering the phase without his mentorship anymore. So that's the goofy looking guy in the life is good shirt in the middle. So this lecture is based on a lecture that I started for a group of incoming freshmen. It's a class of a mentor of mine, Bruce Lindsay, at the university, at Washington University in St. Louis. He teaches this class. It's just called Designing Creativity, and it's a really open-ended introduction to design thinking, but interdisciplinary offered to all freshmen across the school. And so when I started, when he asked me to speak a number of years ago, I was trying to think of what's the kind of lecture that would be relevant at all to incoming freshmen. And I thought, well, they're not so interested in here's all my projects, here's all my work, look at this amazing design that I'm doing. I thought it was a little bit more about let's talk about how confusing your freshman year can be, and all of your basically your path and your process. So to start that, I basically sat down with a piece of paper and was like, I'm going to make a mind map of how I got to where I am. And so I started with, I think somewhere up there, born in Chicago. And I made it all the way down here to starting a business. And just stream of consciousness went for it. And then that's been useful to me. And so in some ways, this discussion, Pathmaking, it's a little bit about my path to starting this company, and a little bit about the work, but it's also, I'm trying to take you with me on this journey. So, born in Chicago, my parents, Mexican immigrants, our family's in Spain and in Mexico, and so we grew up in Chicago, California, Little Rock, back and forth, but essentially grew up in Little Rock, and I now appreciate how beautiful do you guys know anyone from Little Rock? So it's beautiful. It's a beautiful state. So that's left an impression, and so I need a Little Rock photo in here. But something that I think formed a foundation of the way I see design is that all the travel we would go back to see, whenever we would visit our family, either in Mexico or in Spain, I was struck by the power of either Mexican artists or Mexican architects. So on here there's Luis Barragan, famous Mexican modernist architect. Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, very powerful. I mean, I'd say a very hipster statement of I liked her before she was cool. But I'm really glad that everybody else is kind of on the same page now. Another Spanish, French artists, but so we loved going to museums, loved going to these spaces, and grew up seeing these really, really powerful body of art, powerful spaces, Park Güell in Spain. And I just remember the power of being struck by a space that was obviously created to mean something. So you walk in, you see a painting, and paintings move you or they don't move you. It's not like right or wrong, but certain things call to you. And these things called to me, and I just remember this feeling that my soul was being spoken to. Even as a kid, like you see something like that, and you're just like, this is fun and amazing, and I'm so glad that I'm a person. And so on some level, I think I realized that I want to do that for the world. This is something that I'd like to be able to contribute to, some space that makes somebody's soul feel at home or feel awake. So next phase, we're kind of journeying here, this phase of life. So, I didn't know, maybe you guys knew you wanted to be architecture, urban design, that, maybe you knew that pretty early on. I didn't. I liked art, I liked math, loved the science fair as a nerdy kid. And it was, I think my parents were like, well, you like physics and you like art and you like math, you should study architecture. And I was kind of like, well, I don't know, I kind of want to study art. And they're like, let's get you into something practical, let's do architecture. I got back at them and I married an artist, so it worked out for me. So I looked at a number of schools, settled on Washington University, got a great scholarship to go there, made it affordable because University of Arkansas was like my dream before that. And I started in the School of Architecture, never having really met an architect, never talked to an architect, just like, this is the scientific best combination of things. And to be honest, I didn't love it. I stuck with it. At some point I transferred to the School of Art. I now appreciate the intense rigor and the design thinking of architecture, and I really appreciate architects. And our studio brings in a lot of architects to work for, architecture graduates to work for us, because I think we have this kind of hybrid practice that, I think kind of design education is broad and not so pigeonholed until you specialize yourself. But so this is just some of my undergraduate work. But, so this is a set of drawings when I went to study abroad in Florence, and, we're supposed to look at details, and for whatever, everybody's over there drawing the Duomo and drawing the David, and I'm just looking at every inlet for water, every moment that there was the water around the city. So everyone's looking up, and I'm over there looking at the sewer and trying to sketch it. I should have realized that I wanted to be a landscape architect. But I didn't yet know what that was. Then there's a set of public artworks I really liked. I liked the idea of making objects that could create spaces for people. So this is a public art commission at the university, which I eventually built. Transferred to the School of Art, where I started working with natural forms, but in artificial ways. So it's this was topography, this was cloud made out of plastic. This was stones made out of plaster, tree made out of, tree parts and ceramic. But, again, maybe in hindsight, I'm obviously interested in the land or landscape. This was, art school again. You tied people up and saw how long it would take to rescue people. There was a whole, this is related to community and helping, but, longer story. But the projects that really meant a lot to me and actually brought me back to architecture from my hiatus in the art school were these more civic-minded projects. So there was a competition run by Architecture for Humanity, in 2004 or 5, something like that. It was sponsored by AMD, which is a computer chip company. Now I'm realizing I don't know if they still exist. But they sponsored this competition, three different clients around the world, and is actually this odd thing where it's 3 different clients, and not only were you competing to be the best project for your client. So this was a chocolate factory in Ecuador, run by an indigenous collective named Kayari. who wanted to, instead of just making like cacao, they wanted to make a factory and like control their, their product from growth all the way to product, and also bring internet to remote regions of the Amazon. You're competing also against, I think, a mobile health clinic in Africa and like I forget, some telemedicine center somewhere else. So it's like you're competing for the project, but also against the other projects. I think the actress Cameron Diaz was one of the jurors. But anyway, so we, as a group of students, this wasn't a studio project. This was just something that we got really excited about. We got grants to study in Ecuador, go meet the to meet the farmers, to really understand the site. And all of a sudden I started understanding that design could be something that could really change someone's life. Like this is what I wanted, and I didn't understand the formality of design school yet, but once it started becoming applicable to like real people and something really meaningful, I was like, oh no, all right, I'm back, okay. So, but again, like the part that was interesting to me is sort of the site and the grounds. Another project was also not entirely a studio project, a seminar with the American Institute of Architects for their 100th year anniversary in St. Louis. They wanted to design this marketplace in the Ville neighborhood, which is a historic African-American community in the city with a lot of great thinkers and musicians and artists that live in that neighborhood, but has since kind of fallen into decline. And so this was an idea that you could make this marketplace that could have a lot of it's a food desert and it could bring in fresh produce, but also support possibly minority farmers in the region to have a place to sell their produce. And it was this whole thing. And so again, like students, we designed this marketplace, and for a couple of years, a friend of mine and I kept with the project and kept working in it, detailing it out the building. But this is where I was like, okay, design could do something. This is really wonderful and meaningful. And then I graduate, and this is 2007, 8-ish, and it's the recession. So, I'm still unconvinced about whether I want to be an architect, an artist. I decided to stay in St. Louis, even though it's not my native home, and translate. I love the city. I just thought it had so much possibility to be a designer, be a young designer, 20-something years old, and able to like impact the city that you choose to live in. So I stayed there. I worked for a theater company for a number of years as their scenic charge artist. Didn't have a theater background before that, but like really threw myself at theater. And it's like all of a sudden it's like, now do I want to be an architect or a scenic artist or an artist? What do I want to do? I was helping some friends out with these community garden spaces and thinking like, what do you do with a community garden with all these like problematic site conditions where it has this community garden on an asphalted lot? What do? You put everything on wheels, roll it out to grow in the sunlight, and then when you want to have an event, roll it away to have an event. So I was having a lot of fun in St. Louis, kind of playing with these things, and I talked to a mentor of mine and was like, okay, it's August. I'm thinking about going to grad school next year. What should I apply in? And she's the one who recommended this novel thing called landscape architecture. She's like, it's going to be great for you. You're kind of dancing around all these issues. It's like, you might do other things, but I think this is going to be a great thing for you to do. And I'm really glad that I listened to her, because then I went on to study at WashU in their new Master of Landscape Architecture program, from which Natalie Yates was my first studio instructor. You guys are really lucky to have her. So anyway, I found my home, like hands down, loved everything I was doing. Whether it's just master's programs are wonderful because all of a sudden like an entire body of faculty is there to help you hone what your design vision. So it's possible that just all master's programs are great. This was just the right place for me to kind of write questions. This beautiful like ability to kind of do whatever, like I was very hands-on, analog, digital, hybrid media was my interest. Big systems, small systems, some design build work. So this is from the slide. I still love that image. It's just like two different shades of mulch and how beautiful that is when those two really subtle things come together. This is a collaboration with Theaster Gates, who's an artist out of Chicago, and he came to teach an intensive summer workshop where we built this sort of, he had a house, again, it's basically he had a foundation, the Rebuild Foundation, and he kind of takes over properties in different parts of the city and makes this like community center that's also like an art, part of his art practice. So we were helping with that, and we designed and built the landscape, painted a tree orange. So anyway, I was like, I'm totally thrilled, really excited to be doing what I was doing. And then again, like graduated. Was like, well, now what? I loved the academic study of landscape architecture. What do I do now? So I was really fortunate that a professor of mine started a new company, and it was like a little bit different. There practice in the city of St. Louis. I think I don't remember if it was Natalie or if it was Dorothy who was like, well, let's figure out who you could work for in the city, because it didn't completely fit being a little bit unconventional in the way that I approach landscape architecture. It didn't make a lot of sense for me to work for a number of the firms that existed, and there are not that many firms. So a professor of mine started a practice, and I went to work for him. It's actually Arbolope 1.0. So I was a contract employee for his company doing a lot of the design and working with him. And I did that for a number of years until he retired, and then I decided to really launch Arbolope Studio as a standalone practice. And subsequently asked him to join me as an advisor, and that worked out really beautifully for the last 3 years. So while I was doing that, and what I continue to do is teach. So I've gone back to teach at Washington University. This, I think, is related to a project that you guys, I think Natalie, students are going to be working on, the clay modeling. I took over the sequence of clay modeling both for architecture and landscape architecture students. But in what I've been teaching since about 2012 is site planning for architecture students. So so that's in the architecture curriculum. It's for undergrads and for graduate school students, and it's the landscape architecture boot camp for about 6 weeks in the architecture curriculum. And I think it's a really important class, and I really enjoy teaching it. And I like working with architects and helping them gain a sensitivity to how complex sites are to work with. They don't need to be landscape architects, but they need to kind of see how sites, can influence a design. I think a lot of great architecture is site specific and arises because of really interesting site conditions. Also, I teach representation for the first year landscape architecture students in the master's program. This is kind of a collection of work from that. Also, these over here. And for the advanced placement architecture students, kind of their introduction to the school, where we do these like topographies. It's loosely wall-in topography study. I think they make these incredible models, just like the craft out of an architecture program is amazing. But it's, you have a system and you have an intervention in a system, and it's just a very landscape-oriented project. So I love teaching that in the architecture school. Other things that I taught, and actually part of the reason that I ended up breaking off and starting Arbolope Studio, is I kind of took a sabbatical from working in this other firm to teach in a program called St. Louis Artworks, and it's a nonprofit in St. Louis, and what it does is it is an apprenticeship program for kids from, let's say, underserved communities, and it teaches them real-world job skills and related to the arts. So what they're really known for is doing these kind of reused bicycle. They make a lot of bike racks made of bikes that have been decommissioned, and they make kind of sculptures. So anyway, you commission this group of apprentices, and so it's like it's this amazing program that's not like an after-school program. It's actually a job for a lot of people that may not have been able to just come into that kind of a job on their own. So it's job training, and I think it's a really wonderful model for opening up the field of design to communities that for whatever reason aren't attracted to the design profession. So that class made me realize, I went into this because I want to design in my community. I really want to do work, not necessarily only for really well-paying clients. I love doing work for them, but I want to do something that benefits the community. And so part of breaking off and just really launching an Arbolope studio is like, can I have a design firm that can do both? And I'm not going to lie, it's still an experiment. We're seeing if this is a sustainable business model. So I'm going to show you some of the work that our studio does, and I've broken it into those original categories. I think I have about 2 projects per category. So in this first city campus corridor, starting with the first project this is my first commission as Arbolope Studio on its own, and it's a master plan. We call it a sustainable water master plan for the university, the UTPL, which is the technical university, the technical private university, Universidad Técnica Particular de Loja. It's a private Catholic university in Loja, which is in Ecuador on the Andes Mountain. It's actually one of the southern Andean cities. Really, really lovely city that I had an opportunity to teach as a visiting instructor, and then they invited me back to do a master plan. So it's a really insane topographical site. Like these, I think each one of these tiny little white lines, I don't know if you can see them back there, there's something like 3-meter contour lines, you know? So it's just the amount of topography across that campus is very intense. So we were just looking at how water moves across the campus, and also where the areas of just inaccessible topography to build on because they're just too steep. And you can see that the university is built basically in their flattest plateaus of the campus. And so this is the main part of the campus right here, their administrative building. I can't remember if I think this is their architecture building over here, their library wing in that direction. So they were, interested in what to do in this main, kind of the heart of campus. But then they have the secondary campus that's a little bit uphill, bisected by a kind of a big thoroughfare. This is more of a research science campus. And then because this is a Catholic university, this is where their chancellor, who is a priest, and also some of the clergy live in this area right here. And then they have this uphill, undeveloped land, which they wanted an idea of a very loose idea of how to develop that. So the main focus of our project actually ended up being in this area, because this was it was inspired because the chancellor, this is a private street. It cuts through the campus, so it kind of ruins the continuity of the campus experience. They don't have, it's not the same culture of campus where we're like, oh, I go out and I just talk in the lawn, and I just hang out with my friends. But they're trying to cultivate that kind of academic, they don't want to be a commuter campus is the issue. It caters to really people from Loja, but it's a top university in Ecuador. So they're trying to cultivate this community, like using outdoor space. And the chancellor, he gets driven up the street from the major thoroughfare. He goes here, he gets dropped off. He's the only person who has access to this road. But he gets dropped off at his main building, and he just felt that the campus didn't look right. And he also understood that they have a lot of issues related to stormwater management. And some of that is because Ecuador is following in the footsteps of all the developing countries, where so what do we do with our stormwater, right? What do we do? It's a problem. We channelize it, we hide it, we off-put it, and it's someone else's problem. At the same time, Ecuador is this incredibly progressive country that really values its environment. It realizes it has one of the largest assortment of, it has this incredible biodiversity, it has rainforest, it has high altitude desert, it has a beach, it has the Andes Mountains, and so they're very concerned with sustainability, and so they're kind of aware that there are problems related to the way that they manage stormwater. And so this is just a slide of all of the examples of how they move. We called it the areas of opportunity, or the potential opportunity. I forget exactly how we worded it. And then we kind of addressed all of those issues, and we're like, okay, well, so what's the vision for the campus? Like, what can it be? And we're like, well, the UTPL could be this leader for sustainable stormwater management. And the way it could do that is by testing strategies. We're just now doing this in the United States, trying to find better ways to manage our stormwater. I don't know how Muncie is, but St. Louis was sued by the EPA for its discharge from the combined sewer system into the Mississippi River. And so the city has just gotten behind this, like, we need to capture stormwater at its source. We can no longer push it off into, basically the problem should go downstream. So the university could be a laboratory for that kind of stormwater management in the region and maybe even the country. A lot of these other ones, collect and filter stormwater. But I think the biggest approach is like we need to not moonlight. We need to uncover water. There's like a phrase that I forget. Daylight. We need to daylight stormwater. And we need to make people, we have two issues. We have the university not having this kind of collegiate gathering culture, and we have this stormwater problem. So how can we solve both problems by daylighting stormwater and also creating spaces for people to gather around that water, in a really nice way. So we were inspired by, just formally, we're inspired by some petroglyphs. The university has this strong archaeological department within their art department, and they've discovered some cave carvings and some petroglyphs, and they have these kind of curvy geometries. There's also a lot of Latin American landscape architects like Roberto Burle Marx, and there's this famous Ecuadorian painter, Guayasamín, and so we're kind of looking at those geometries and thinking like we can draw from this for this master plan. And so in the end, what we did is we took that main campus street that the chancellor, drives on every day, and we kind of pulled and bent and we made it into this raised table, so now no longer having that separation between the two parts of campus. It's all at the same level in this kind of pedestrian promenade. We also start collecting water from the highest point on the site, and very slowly through a series of ponds, we kind of called it a necklace, where there are these occasional gems. So we're moving water and then we're collecting water. And then we're always gathering, whenever we gather water, we're trying to gather people. And that snakes across the campus, from this new, this is a tiny little entrance. So we're saying now we're going to have this big civic entrance to the campus. You're going to come down this grand set of stairs, and you're going to snake around the campus, and peel off over here all the way to this. This is sort of this landmark for the campus. So we had some diagrams of what that would look like. Is it constant water flow, or just sort of like there's standing bodies of water, and then there was a lot of paved runnels that will fill, during rain events. In Ecuador, it rains like every day in this part of Ecuador, but not always so intensely. There's rainy seasons and dry seasons, though it's on the equator, so every day is exactly the same length. The temperature is almost exactly the same temperature. It's a very even climate, with the exception of some rainstorms. So we showed a few enlargements, to the chancellor. Like, these are a couple of these key gathering spaces. This is like high-level master planning. This project has not yet continued for a number of reasons, that the campus has some other capital projects that they're working on, but I think the chancellor is still interested in the vision, and especially like this more campus heart aspect of the project. So we showed him, so this is actually him getting out of his car. These channels, these stormwater channels, collect right at the front, right at the main entrance of the the administrative building, this big pond where you could kind of sit and dip your feet in. So slightly wet, like North American idea of how you could gather around public spaces, but very well received by the university. Axons of some of the spaces. Really beautiful tree. It's every beautiful plant that we have inside of a building just grows wild there. It's like all of your indoor plants are just like, there's orchids hanging from trees, It's beautiful. Beautiful place to be. And so this is this monument, this giant cross kind of on the edge of the hill looking over the city. Some of it just give you an idea of what the campus looked like. how we could cross over. I think the exciting challenge of this was going to be working with a local architect who specializes maybe a little bit more in site. There's no landscape architecture yet. The university doesn't have a landscape architecture program, though some of the faculty have studied in other universities, they've studied landscape architecture, but it's all kind of architecture encompasses everything. And so I was really excited about finding someone we could partner with and do this like clearly civics, civic academic space, and what that would mean for the university and the city. So that was our first project, and then this is kind of all the way at the other end of this scale. This is the project that I'm working on right now, every day. So this is Washington University in St. Louis, so this is where I teach and where I went to school. And we're working with Michael Vergeson Landscape Architects. I don't know if you guys know them. They're a really amazing landscape architecture firm in Alexandria, Virginia. They're the design, they're the prime landscape architect. It's actually a project that has 3 landscape architects on the team because one, we get along so well, generally landscape architects do, and also because it's that important of a project. So Michael is the design landscape architect. Jeffrey Bruce and Associates is another landscape architect that specializes in soils. Kieran Timberlake and MRY are the architects on the project. So it's the kind of project that has a couple of architects, a couple of big design architects, a couple of local architects, and a lot of landscape architects. And so far it's working out pretty well. We're several years in. I think Michael started working on the project probably 6 years ago. So it's been a long time, and we got involved about 3 years ago, and it's now very much under construction. So this is our version of your guys' art and architecture school. It's the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts. So we have the architecture school, kind of a combined art architecture studios in this building, art school, newish art school, library, museum. Basically, this is the front door of the campus. This is we have this castle that everybody recognizes. If you know Washington University, it's got a castle, and this is it. But the front, and then this is Forest Park, which is this incredible, here we are. Forest Park's incredible urban park. It's larger than Central Park, has a lot of our museums. It's really beautiful. Everything is free. And the university is right at the edge of that. But the front door of the campus has always been this big parking lot. So we have this beautiful, we no longer have, we had a beautiful alley of oak trees right here that were, aging out. And a lot of cars. And the university sort of realizing, it's kind of landlocked. There's not anywhere else for it to grow. It needs to develop the land that it has. Made this, I think, pretty great decision to put all of this parking underground in a very large underground parking garage. Also to remove this as a street. So we were very cut off as the art and architecture school and the engineering school over here. One, we're very cut off from each other. Really, you never cross this part of campus. You'd also never go uphill to the this is the social work school. Here's just arts and sciences, the rest of the campus. So it's they undertook this giant project to kind of develop this side of campus. One to remove all of the underground parking garage, but also to add new art and architecture facilities, add new engineering school facilities, add some this administrative building is sort of too much program for its size. And this was actually built in the 1904 World's Fair. It was kind of an administration for the World's Fair, and then became the administrative building for the university. So they needed some new kind of buildings to welcome students when they come to the university for the first time. So they decided to add this welcome center, which is kind of a little pavilion and a hub. But also, there's no food on this side of campus. We're in our own little food desert. And so the idea is we need to really do something to increase the community. The rest of the campus is sort of, had an Olmsted design, and had a Cope and Stewardson design plan. It's the university really loves how it was, how the rest of the university works. A lot of beautiful quads, very, very much what you think of when you think of a campus for higher learning. But this side of the campus was just, honestly, it was a mess. So the design did some other pretty amazing things. So the topography that goes up to Brookings Hill was a little insurmountable. It was basically this side of campus was fairly flat, and then all of a sudden you had this big hill, so it wasn't ADA accessible. And so the new design. So this was our old East End landscape. You can see all the parking. The new landscape is essentially, it's a giant park, I think 15-acre park across the street from Forest Park, and now kind of a new welcoming face of the university. We have some pavilions that are hiding back in here. And actually, since this rendering, the McKelvey family, the family that started Square, has donated a new building here. So there's actually a new engineering school. So it's kind of completing this engineering campus. Also a lot of thinking about mobility, and the university struggling with changing ways that people are moving around campus. It was like it's a campus designed to be pedestrian oriented. Really, scale of the sidewalks is about pedestrian. So it's kind of you drive to campus, you stop, and then you walk through the rest of the campus. But of course, students want to bike everywhere. So we're having a lot of conflicts with bicycle infrastructure, both in the pathways and also where do all those bikes get stored. So a new vision for how to introduce and welcome bikes in certain parts of the campus that ties into this big mobility master plan that we worked on that I didn't include in this presentation. No longer a cut through here. Now there's entrances into the garage from both ends, and now you have kind of a seamless transition from the art and architecture side of campus, the engineering. You have very clear connections across to each other, and also across we call the Hilltop campus. Some beautiful renderings. That's the Karen Timberlake building. So our involvement on the project, not having been there from the beginning of the design, is really we're the local landscape architects. So the partnership's been really amazing. There's kind of there's sometimes a contentious relationship between a design architect and their local partners. There might be some kind of butting of head. Michael and his team are amazing, and I think they're incredibly generous in just sharing the design, from the concept all through the drawings, having us review the work, because what we bring to the team is that we've built projects in St. Louis. We know the materials, we know the contractors, we know the campus really well. So this is this is a set of diagrams that we did a little bit for ourselves, but how do you keep all this project together? This is an enormous project. So, we take the construction documents, and sometimes we go back and we make them diagrams. We took all of our construction documents and we color-coded everything. There's 11 types of pavers here, right? It's a project that really, really highly thought, what are all the different kinds of spaces, and what kind of material language can help you, give you visual cues about what you should be doing in different spaces. There's a lot of auto courts, but to kind of slow down vehicle traffic, shared spaces between vehicles and pedestrians, this like central court, which is this new kind of welcoming landscape between the hub, the hub, which is this food court area, and the welcome center. This is one of my favorite parts of the design, and I don't really have favorites. I'm not in general, I don't have very many superlatives, but I really like this piece, which is this sunken garden. It's actually at the level of the parking garage underneath. It's kind of this like jewel of a landscape that's like sunken into the ground, and allows people to kind of find their way into the garden and then up to the art and architecture schools. And so part of what we're doing is we're mobilizing the mock-ups. We're looking at the materials. Is this the right material choices for the project? The part of design that you don't realize, at least from I don't know, maybe your guys' program is a little bit different, but we didn't get so far into material technology when I was in school, but I found it so fascinating and really, really rewarding. The choices that you make at the construction phase of a project, where you're saying, is this really the right material? Is this really the right filler material between pavers? Like, are these the two things that should go together? A little anecdote is just, these pavers are made they're Unilock pavers, but there's a factory in Canada and there's a factory outside of New York. And the shade of these pavers is slightly different from one factory to the other, despite them being the same paver. And when you look at them, it actually matters. Like, now I'm forgetting which one we decided was the right tone. But I think it's like it was just a slightly warmer sand, because obviously these like materials are specific. They're made in certain sites, right? So the New York pavers are using sand that's local to New York. The Canada pavers using sand that's in that part of Canada. And we preferred one because it was slightly warmer. Like that matters, and I find it so exciting. It's so cool. You know, and we've been like fussing with materials. Like, we invented a new standard for the university. The university has these like very, very established design guidelines, and all of a sudden they're like, how do we put a bike lane in? Like, what if that's not one of our standard materials? And so we experimented probably like 30 different types of concrete, because it both had to work, but you know, it had to work for the university, had to blend with their material palette, but it also had to be, you know, it couldn't be too fussy, right? You have a standard that's a little bit too fussy, and then every contractor is going to do it a little bit differently. And for, you know, most universities, there are these timeless campuses. They don't want hodgepodge materials. They want consistency. So establishing the exact right mix of concrete to kind of match and blend everything else. I was telling Natalie that I can write like 10 pages on concrete now, and I'm really glad that I can. You know, the soil technology is incredible in this project. There's I think 4 or 5 different types of soil, because what you don't realize when you look at a landscape is it really has to like perform. It has to work. Like, these are not, like, they look kind of like beautiful, pristine, natural, you know, what is natural landscapes, but it's a completely manufactured space. But it has to do things. It has to capture stormwater. It's also, you know, there's this this is a parking garage under here. You know, so all of this landscape is on top of a parking garage, and it's taking all of the stormwater from uphill and, you know, moving it down, and we don't want leaks in this parking garage. You know, it's enormous, and, you know, so there's just a lot of thinking to soil because of weight, because of how it transfers water, because of nutrients, because of the intense use of some of these lawn spaces. There's a lot of activities. They want to do concerts and graduations. So there's just a lot of thinking, and this is where Jeffrey Bruce comes. Is that he has a lot of experience with soil technology and really like when I think of like design research, you know, you think of a lot of different things. I think their office is doing this incredible research on what works in terms of soil. So there's some different profiles and what they need to do. You know, some of these soils have fiber additives that can basically support the weight of a fire truck, of like one of the huge, like 50,000 pound fire trucks can be supported on lawn and soil. I find that stuff very, very, very cool. That's our version of the soil plan to like help ourselves understand what's happening. And then the plant palette. This is going to be this incredibly diverse, biodiverse plant palette on the campus. Which is a really exciting range of this is just the tree species. So one of the visuals at the university is they had this oak allée, and people were really, really upset when they took down the allée. Naturally, it's like been the vision of the university is these beautiful 100-year-old oaks. But the problem is, you know, they're monoculture. They were all kind of declining all at the same time. And so a thought is, how do we make this like beautiful allée, but not run into the same issues that we experienced, you know, for the last 100 years of the monoculture. So there's this mixed species, but yet uniform visual producing allée. You know, some other really strong architectural groupings of trees. Another part of our involvement is we were there for the selection of all, this is 190 something trees, and we were there to like hand select every tree, and that's like personally my favorite day. Oh goodness, 2 favorites in one presentation. Bad day. But yeah, we're there to hand select every tree, and it's just such a cool part of our profession is that, you know, we care about those materials. And then, you know, of course, more diagrams we have the planting plan, and then we have our graphic of like really understanding the complexity of these planting beds, and you know, this is all the plant material, and then highlighted the plant material on this particular sheet. You know, so even at this stage of things where we're like deep into construction administration, we're still thinking about graphics and legibility. Legibility not only for the contractor, actually this drawing back here that Anu at our office put together, you know, we have a whole set of construction documents. This is the drawing that everybody has on site. that's like, all the contracts. A little bit risky. We have it for reference only, yet this is the drawing that everybody's looking at and checking, and I find that really, really exciting that, that graphic, like the interest in graphic legibility is important even at this stage of things, It also makes me wonder why we do construction documents the way we do them. Like, I understand, but at some point, sometimes, I've always wondered if there are just better ways to communicate construction standards. Oh, we're not going to get far at all. Gather, commitment, relax. I'm just going to breeze through this project. This was my first built project, actually, before we started Arbolope, so this was with the other firm. But I included it because it was really thinking theatrically about layers of landscape. And then in our new firm, we were asked to redesign the same landscape. So this is the same landscape, and my former business partner would always say that you knew your career was over when you started renovating your projects. When they ask you, it's like they're tearing them down, and I was like, this is bad news. This is 3 years in, and we're being asked to, tear a project down and rebuild it. But with the same, it was exciting because they came to us and they're like, we really love the landscape, but it needs to change for a couple of programmatic reasons. Flip through that. Working with the architects to design a visitor center for Frank Lloyd Wright House, the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park. This is with Bolin, Zelinsky, and Jackson. That was a lot of fun because we kept passing Photoshop files between us. I've never had such a collaborative set of graphics. I think I'm going to end with this project. This is another project we're working on right now, and this is part of our kind of civic-minded studio, civic-leaning, I call it maybe the city studio aspect of our practice. So the client kind of originally came to us as like, can you do some pro bono design work for us? And my response to them is that, we are a community-based design practice. Like, we can't do pro bono design because we are part of the community. We're just not structured to do that kind of thing. What we can do is kind of have rates of how we charge different clients. Like, we want design to be affordable and accessible for everybody. We think it's maybe our way of making the world a better place is saying, like, really thoughtfully designed landscapes that can help heal our communities and bring people together shouldn't be like so prohibitively expensive. So this is part of our model. We're trying to find, like, how do you balance that really like sincere intention to do work for low-income communities or communities that are historically underserved by really high-quality public space. And so it is a model where we're leaning heavily on grant tree programs and community volunteer efforts. We may be out there laying out some of these crazy recycled paver in the park that we're doing. So we're just trying to explore like how we can be a design office and find different ways to practice. And so that's, I think, a lot of times why I call ourselves an experiment it's the Arbolope experiment. Kind of at the end of the year, we're like, did the Arbolope experiment succeed this year? Well, we're still here. So I guess we're still working. But it's one of my interests is how to make this work as a business practice. Like, how to have as high quality work that we can possibly have, not having different standards for different clients, but be able to work with, for example, we're working with Studio Gang Tower that's under construction right now, and this project in the Ville, which is that neighborhood I mentioned earlier, the historic African American neighborhood. Like, how can we bring the same level of attention and detailing to both projects and make that work for an office? Like, is it possible? And so far it is, and I'm really excited by what we do, and I think our office is also really excited, hopefully, to be doing what we're doing. But I think that's where I'm gonna leave us. Yeah. So then, do you typically do questions? Okay.
I know that you don't really work a lot with
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a second-year architecture student, and I have a really big project, so I'm just wondering what is advice that you give to architecture students about site planning and what to focus on, and kind of those basic guidelines for designing the site as a whole piece.
That's a great question. I think landscape architects, like we don't have to design, like we may site a building or we may have some thoughts on how a building is designed, but I think we're pretty comfortable saying like at some point we're not going to design the building, we're going to work with somebody else. We just have to understand kind of the basic constraints of how a building might be sited and why it might be sited a certain way. I think the inverse from an architecture perspective, I think there is a feeling that you have to design everything. And what I tell people, you don't. You have to understand the basic principles of how a site works, but the level of attention and need to control every aspect of the thing you're designing, I found that as a big challenge when I went from architecture to landscape. Is in architecture, you're designing this object, and every space in that object has to be highly designed. It's expensive. The space between the wall, you're programming exactly where you want all of your utilities to go. You have all these ways of visualizing how all of the systems come together, but everything is highly, highly programmed and shouldn't be moving around, right? It should be changing. It shouldn't, it's very much like it's a fixed thing and a lot of attention to every little piece, right? Landscape, I think, has equal attention to detail, but a little bit more acceptance that things are going to change and shift over time. So what we tell architecture students is you're designing big picture ideas of how you want it to work. You may not need to design, you don't need to pick every tree, right? Because maybe that's not your area of study. But you have a broad idea that, okay, I want my building to function this way. What's it like to approach that building? What does it feel like as a person? Maybe I want shade around it. I think just finding images of comparable types of landscape and try to figure out what about that is appealing to you. You look at a thing and there's like these tall, like shrubby, visually impenetrable forests, and you're like, I want that because I want to feel enclosed. Or, these like big grasslands and So it's basically, the biggest thing is to kind of let go of the need to highly design everything. We design infrastructure, and we design, we kind of give things bones, and we allow our work to change and shift over time. So I think that's on a very, very big site, decide the areas that you definitely need to highly control, and design areas that just need to function in a certain way.
Thank you.
So a lot of the people and lectures talk about multidisciplinary practices, and a lot of the people who are presented are kind of multidisciplinary people, such as yourself. How do you feel that schools should change, or that you see schools changing to kind of incorporate more of a multidisciplinary
I think there's not enough collaboration in almost any school I've ever seen. I know the university we teach at says it's very interdisciplinary. We're all under this Sam Fox School of Art and Visual Design. We should be able to cross-pollinate a lot more, and there is some of that. And I think every university, almost every person I've talked to has some aspect of that in their intention, but it's just difficult to do logistically. But I think more of that, allowing your students to take other classes, because again, it's about diversity of ideas, and so we have a way of approaching design problems and having people that have slightly different interests. Having a mentor of mine was like, well, you don't need to hire clones of yourself, you do you, and you need other people to plug in the things that you don't do as well, and that's how you make a good team. And so I think that's some of the that's the benefit of multidisciplinary. And I don't know that every person needs to be everything, so we're multidisciplinary, but we have a spectrum of things that we do. We know things that we don't do. We know we're not civil engineers. We know we're not nearly as knowledgeable about site technology as there's other firms, and I think you're multidisciplinary within your office, but I think you also have to accept that you're going to have areas of strength, and you're going to bolster that. So as a person who might have some multidisciplinary interests, you don't need to be the best tap dancer and the best architect and the best horticulture person, and you don't have to be all that. You have to just assume that you're going to be part of a team, or you're going to try to find a community and a team that you work really well together with. And so I guess that's another thing of just finding other people, more collaboration. I think schools are sort of, it's your design project, you design it all, you have your instructor, but it's yours, and I found that it doesn't really work like that at the scale of work that we're doing. Like, very, very collaborative. You have to really learn how to work well with other people. Take criticism and accept that you don't know about this. Sometimes someone else knows a little bit more. So it's I think everyone, it's like one of these catchwords, like we're all multidisciplinary, but no, we don't do everything. But I think we are a little bit more broadly interested in design and art than I think there are more focused offices, and I think there's more multidisciplinary offices. I think we're somewhere in the middle. Anyone else? All right. Oh.
Does your interest in music composition figure into your design?
I've been thinking about this a lot, where I think it does in the way that I think, because when I've composed music, it's like problem solving and it's trying to get the right arrangement of sounds. I think it's a very similar way to how I design projects, where it's like trying and trying and trying. Though in music, I can just put a tape recorder and just work for 2 hours and then come back, listen, and stitch it together. So it's a slightly different process in design, but I think design is like that too. You're sketching, and you have a couple of different ideas, and you eventually sort of stitch the best of it. So I think it plays into the way that we work. Just that it's how I learned. That's kind of my first design problem, was music, and so I think it's just how I'm wired, and I realize that that's one of our multidisciplinary strengths. Is that's how my mind works, and I realize it's so different than the way some other people that I work with, the way that their minds work.
I think this is a related question, but an odd one. And you get to, your answer could be that give us a hint of the project you almost got to. Because from the website, it looked really interesting from the standpoint of designing something that is different night and day or seasonal or depending on what's happening. So that could be your answer to my question.
So that
What's the next project you're going to get to?
Love Bank. Love Bank is I love Love Bank Park. One, because this is a neighborhood. When I stayed in St. Louis, it's like I have to move to Cherokee Street because it's kind of this artist center of the city. It's also kind of a Chicano, more Chicano heritage part of town. But it's just a really, really multicultural part of the city. It's got Buddhist temple and just has kind of everything. And there's no public space on the street, and so the community kind of came together, and there was an empty lot, and they sort of put up some basketball hoops, and that started Love Bank Park. And it's just asphalt, 2 hoops. Great. It's like now a very, very vibrant space, but it doesn't look great, and there's tension because it doesn't really serve everyone. Like basketball serves one community, then there's the Hispanic community wants a place for different kinds of events, and people want more out of that corner. And so we're working on an idea of how do we make one public space that actually works for a lot of different communities. And so we were inspired by, what are commonalities? How do you graph commonalities? You use Venn diagrams. And we're oh yeah, Venn diagrams where the overlapping circles kind of come together and show those areas of overlap. And so we designed this landscape with that idea of kind of the Venn diagrams. And I think this is us kind of painting in public space. So the design, formally has that sort of we're always trying to tell a story and have some poetry to the way that we work, which is related to music, and I think it like pulls you and makes you feel a certain way. But this is like, hopefully the design like pulls you through and makes you feel. But it's also trying to tell a story about like how you would design a space that's bringing communities together. So in its layout. It's also like, this is part of our, like, how do we fund these civic projects? This project won a large-scale rainscaping grant from the Metropolitan Sewer District. So if it could fundraise the initial cost of building the park, it could be fully reimbursed. And it's unbuilt because to date the client hasn't been able to fundraise the initial amount. But to us, it's like a really exciting model, because like if you could invest in public space and then get your money back, you know. So it's an avenue we're exploring, and we've been more successfully able to have projects built at smaller scales. This one is sort of the one that's eluded us so far. You know, but it still has like the basketball court that can function as a food truck. This food truck court, and this is all permeable pavement. Basically, the entire plaza went from asphalt to permeable pavement. And then it was thinking about phasing, so how you could bring in a structure a little bit later. You know, what it would be like day to day on Cherokee Street when it's just like, you know, it's a community park, but then it brings in visitors. It's a more publicly at large draw during bigger festivals, which is, you know, for example, the Cinco de Mayo festival. And it's supposed to be really, really active because that neighborhood is active, but it doesn't have a space for something like this. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I am glad I got to talk about Love Bank. Yeah, this, I'm still very, very hopeful that we'll be able to have it built. And it, you know, relates to kind of this thing we're struggling with. Is like, we're designers, we're good at design, we're good at thinking, we're good at communicating. We're not necessarily great at fundraising, and should we be? Maybe we should. Maybe we need that person if we want to focus on these community projects. You know, but is the client, like the client came to us, the client, like, you know, paid for design services, and we can help so far, but, you know, we kind of need a partnership back and forth. And they're pretty receptive and pretty good about that, but we just haven't made it over that hurdle. All right, thank you guys.